Imagine waking up one day, not to the familiar feeling of the sun on your face or the sound of an alarm, but to a profound and unsettling silence. It's the kind of silence that doesn't just lack noise. It's an active presence, a void that seems to absorb all sound, all light, all thought. You try to speak, but your voice is swallowed. You reach out, but the world feels like a distant painted backdrop. You realize, with a chilling clarity, that this is the world without others, not in some apocalyptic sense, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. The endless clamor of expectations, the constant need for validation, the performative dance of social interaction, it's all gone. And for a moment, an electrifying, terrifying moment, you feel a kind of peace you have never known. This isn't a dream. It's the core paradox that has haunted humanity's most brilliant and introspective minds. Why do those with the deepest understanding of the world so often retreat from it? Why is the path to wisdom so frequently a path of solitude? We are told from our earliest moments that belonging is the ultimate goal. Social connection is the bedrock of happiness. We are wired for community, for tribes, for constant engagement. Our social media feeds are a testament to this, a relentless stream of curated validation. We measure our worth in likes, shares, and the approval of the crowd. Yet, throughout history, the figures we revere most, the philosophers, the artists, the seers, have often been those who deliberately chose to stand apart. They found their greatest truths not in the bustling marketplace of ideas, but in the quiet, isolated chambers of their own minds. Think of Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher whose name has become synonymous with a pessimistic outlook. His philosophy, often seen as a bleak indictment of human existence, was forged in isolation. He saw the world as a place of endless suffering, driven by a blind, irrational will. He believed that human society, with its relentless striving for pointless goals and its hollow chatter, was the ultimate manifestation of this suffering. To be a part of it, he argued, was to be a part of the madness. His solution was not to join the fray, but to withdraw, to observe, and to find solace in art and deep contemplation. For him, the wisest minds were those who saw through the social charade and chose to sit in the quiet corner, unmasking the facade rather than participating in the performance. But this isn't just about a single, eccentric philosopher. It's about a pattern that repeats itself across time and culture. Why did so many mystics and spiritual leaders seek the mountaintop or the desert? Why did visionaries lock themselves away in studios and studies? We are taught that to be alone is to be lonely, that it is a failure of social integration. But what if solitude is not a state of being, but a tool? What if it's the crucible where genuine insight is forged, a necessary precondition for seeing the world as it truly is, rather than as others tell you it should be? The social world, with its constant demands and subtle pressures to conform, acts as a veil, obscuring our true selves and our deepest thoughts. It is a noisy room where you can never hear your own voice. And here lies the great question we must confront. What if our deepest fears about solitude are not a bug in our system, but a feature of a society that needs us to be constantly connected, constantly distracted, and constantly in need of validation from the outside? What if the collective fear of being alone is a fear of discovering a truth that society has worked so hard to hide? The truth that we are not defined by our relationships, our followers, or our status, but by the raw, unvarnished substance of our own minds, the terror of solitude is the terror of meeting yourself without the armor of social identity, without the script. We are conditioned to believe this is the end of the world, but for the wisest among us, it is merely the beginning of the journey. What happens when the silence finally begins to speak? The silence, which in your vision was so profound and liberating, is the very thing we are conditioned to fear. The problem is not that we dislike being alone. The problem is that we are systematically trained to fear it, to fill every quiet moment with distraction, and to mistake the validation of the crowd for the strength of a true self. This is the hidden problem, and its roots are as deep as they are unsettling, burrowing through the bedrock of our psychology and philosophy. Schopenhauer, in his brutal honesty, called society a motley crowd, and the average person a mere factory of thoughts for others. He saw through the polite fictions and social pleasantries, arguing that behind the veneer of conviviality lies a deep-seated human need to distract ourselves from the fundamental suffering of existence. For him, the social world is a marketplace of mutual delusion, where we agree to ignore the terrifying truth of our own mortality and the meaningless of our relentless striving. The will to live, Schopenhauer's concept for a blind, purposeless force driving all life, manifests most chaotically in the social sphere, where it is twisted into a competition for status, power, and fleeting satisfaction. The wise mind, he argued, recognizes this futility and steps away, seeking the only true solace, the quiet contemplation that subdues the will, even if only temporarily. The herd, however, is too busy running on the hamster wheel to ever see it. This notion of the herd was taken up by Friedrich Nietzsche, who saw the fear of solitude not as a distraction from suffering, but as a deliberate rejection of greatness. For Nietzsche, a person's ultimate calling is to become an Übermensch, an overman, a being who transcends conventional morality and forges their own values. But the herd, with its morality of good and evil, derived from resentment and weakness, seeks to flatten all exceptional individuals. The herd's greatest weapon against the individual is conformity. It whispers, "Be like us, or you are a failure." To be truly alone is to refuse this whisper, to say no to the comfort of the crowd, and yes to the painful, isolating, but ultimately liberating act of self-creation. The fear of being alone, then, is the fear of becoming who you truly are, stripped of the comfort of external approval. This brings us to the psychological core of the problem, laid bare by Carl Jung. Jung introduced the concept of the persona, the public face we show the world, the mask of social acceptability. We build this persona to navigate social interactions, to gain approval, and to protect ourselves from rejection. But every time we put on this mask, we are also actively repressing the parts of ourselves that don't fit the social mold. These banished traits, desires, and emotions retreat into the shadow, the unconscious, unintegrated aspect of our personality. The social world demands a finely tuned, pleasing persona, leaving no room for the messy, complex, and often dark reality of the shadow. We become so adept at wearing the mask that we forget it's there. We begin to believe that the persona is our true self. This is the hidden force, the great unseen lie. We are not just avoiding solitude, we are avoiding the terrifying task of confronting our own shadow. Being alone is the only time the persona can drop. In the quiet, we are forced to face the anxieties, insecurities, and unfulfilled desires we have worked so hard to bury. Society, with its constant stimulation, the endless scrolling, the buzzing notifications, the demand for instant connection, acts as a perfect anesthetic. It keeps us in a state of perpetual distraction, ensuring we never have to descend into the depths of our own minds. We become excellent social performers, but psychological strangers to ourselves. We are in a state of what Jean-Paul Sartre would call bad faith, living a life in which we pretend we are not free, not responsible for our own choices, and not the author of our own reality. This is the psychological grip that traps us. It is a subtle form of imprisonment where the bars are woven from social expectations, and the key is a terrifying willingness to be alone. You might believe you are choosing to be social, but what if you are merely avoiding a confrontation with your own unvarnished truth? What if the collective addiction to distraction is a collective fear of the mirror? And what if the price for this avoidance is far greater than you can imagine? We have spoken of the psychological and philosophical roots, but what are the direct, tangible consequences of this mass self-deception? The price we pay for avoiding solitude is not merely a philosophical abstraction. It is a very real, very painful tax on our creativity, our well-being, and our very humanity. These are the unseen consequences, subtly shaping every aspect of our lives without our conscious awareness. The first casualty is genuine thought. Deep, creative, and original thinking does not happen in a state of perpetual distraction. It requires sustained, uninterrupted contemplation. The human brain, according to modern neuroscience, needs a period of quiet default mode network activity to consolidate memories, process complex information, and forge new creative connections. But our modern world is a relentless assault on this essential state. The constant buzzing of notifications, the dopamine hit of social media likes, the endless stream of news and entertainment, it all ensures that the mind is never truly at rest. We are mentally and emotionally addicted to this input, to this external validation, which starves the internal process of introspection. We don't just lose the ability to think deeply, we lose the desire for it. We become intellectually passive, content to consume the thoughts of others rather than labor to produce our own. The wisest minds are not those who have the most information, but those who have the courage to synthesize that information in the quiet forge of their own contemplation. We are trading that forge for a fast food information kiosk. The next consequence is a profound and pervasive emotional hollowness. We are performing the dance of connection, but we are not truly connecting. We have thousands of acquaintances on social media, but feel profoundly alone. This is the existential emptiness that figures like Viktor Frankl spoke of, a crisis of meaning. Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps, argued that the primary drive of a human being is not pleasure, but the will to find meaning in one's life. Yet, when our lives are a series of curated performances for an audience, the meaning becomes external. We are living for the validation of others, for the likes and the applause, which are a hollow substitute for the inner joy of living an authentic life. The pursuit of meaning is inherently an internal journey, one that requires a deep connection to one's own values, passions, and purpose. But when we are constantly looking outward for signals, we lose the inner compass that points us toward our own truth. You may have a successful career, a wide social circle, and all the markers of a fulfilling life, but you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. with a gnawing sense of emptiness. You have built a life for your persona, but your true self is still trapped in the silent, empty room. And perhaps the most terrifying consequence is the erosion of free will. When we are conditioned to fear solitude, and conform to the herd, we are unconsciously giving up our freedom. The crowd becomes a kind of collective consciousness, a hive mind that dictates our beliefs, our opinions, and even our emotions. We see this in the viral spread of outrage, the ideological purity tests on social media, and the rapid adoption of trends and fads. It is a form of cultural conditioning so subtle that we mistake it for personal choice. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is not a cautionary tale about a totalitarian regime forcing citizens to conform with an iron fist. It's a much more sinister warning about a society where citizens are so thoroughly conditioned and distracted that they willingly give up their freedom in exchange for comfort and pleasure. The citizens of that world were not forced into conformity. They were made to love their servitude. In our world, the servitude is the relentless need for external approval and the fear of being alone. We are not just giving up our solitude, we are giving up the very bedrock of our autonomy. This is the prison you may already be living in. You can feel its bars in the low-grade anxiety when your phone battery dies, in the compulsion to check social media the moment you're alone, in the discomfort you feel when you are forced into silence. It is an unseen prison, and the most dangerous kind, because you are both the prisoner and the willing guard. The question is not whether you are in this trap, but how deeply you are entangled in its insidious web. What is the escape route? Is there a way back to a life of genuine thought, true emotion, and real freedom? The way out of this prison is not an escape from society, but a radical rebellion against its most deeply ingrained lie. It is not an act of physical withdrawal, but an act of profound and terrifying internal defiance. The rebellion is this: you must learn to choose solitude, not as an absence of people, but as the active presence of yourself. This is the counterintuitive solution, the path of the wisest minds. They did not retreat because they hated humanity. They retreat, to find their own, so they could return with something genuine to offer. Consider the Stoics, who for centuries have taught the mastery of the mind. For them, the ultimate freedom was not found in external circumstance, but in the inner citadel of the self. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, ruled an empire, but found his true peace by retreating into the pages of his journal, a quiet space for internal reflection. He saw the world as a chaotic stream of events, and the only path to sanity was to build an unshakable inner fortress. The Stoic practice of solitude is not about loneliness, It is about fortifying your mind against the chaos of external validation and circumstance. It's about training your inner voice to be louder and more authoritative than the clamor of the crowd. It is a rebellion against the constant need for approval, an act of faith in your own inner compass. This is the very essence of Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power, correctly understood. It is not a will to dominate others, but a will to dominate the self, to overcome your own weaknesses, your own fears, and your own ingrained conditioning. The first and most critical fear to overcome is the fear of being alone. To sit in a room with nothing but your own thoughts and not be consumed by anxiety is an act of ultimate power. It is an act that declares you are no longer a slave to external forces. You are no longer living for others. This is the first, most terrifying step of the rebellion. The initial discomfort you feel, the itch to check your phone, the urge to find a distraction, is the sound of your chains rattling. It is the resistance of the old, dependent self dying. Do not run from this discomfort. Embrace it as the growing pains of a new, authentic you. So, what does this rebellion look like in practice? It is deceptively simple and terrifyingly difficult. It is the deliberate, act of disconnecting. It is turning off your phone for a full day. It is a walk without music or podcasts, where you force yourself to listen to the sound of your own footsteps and the world around you. It is sitting in a quiet room, not to meditate in a formal sense, but simply to be with yourself. When the inevitable noise of your internal anxieties, insecurities, and unfulfilled desires comes up, you do not run from it. You sit with it. You face the shadow. You learn its language. This is not a passive act. It is the most difficult and courageous form of labor. It is the raw, unvarnished labor of self-creation, done in a space where no one can applaud you, no one can validate you, and no one can tell you if you are doing it right. This is how the wise break free. They don't wait for society to change. They change themselves. They realize that the true prison is not the world, but their own mind, conditioned to be dependent on the world. The counterintuitive solution is that your freedom is not out there, but inside. It is found in the quiet, in the stillness, in the terrifying act of being alone. The greatest revolution is the internal one, the one where you unmask the self you've been pretending to be and finally come face to face with the one you were meant to become. But what awaits you on the other side of this rebellion? What is the ultimate truth you will find in the silence? The rebellion you have begun, the terrifying journey into solitude, does not end in a desolate wasteland. It leads to the final, most powerful realization. It is the truth that Schopenhauer unmasked, the secret that the wisest minds have always known, and the paradigm shift that will forever redefine your relationship with yourself and the world. The ultimate truth is not that society is the problem. The ultimate truth is that the problem is your identification with the social charade. You are not the mask you wear. You are not the voice in your head that craves approval, fears rejection, and compulsively seeks distraction. You are not you. Our thoughts, your anxieties, your desires, or your past traumas. You are the silent, spacious, and unshakable awareness behind it all. When you finally sit in solitude and face the cacophony of your own mind, you discover that the I that feels lonely, that feels incomplete, that feels like a fraud, is not your true self. It is a noisy, chattering ego, a byproduct of a lifetime of conditioning, and it is terrified of silence because in silence, its illusion of control vanishes. The wisest minds chose solitude not to escape the world, but to escape this relentless, internal performance. They realized that Schopenhauer's will, the blind, irrational force driving suffering and striving, was not a cosmic force outside of them. It was the hurricane of their own unexamined thoughts and desires. The secret of their wisdom was not a philosophy of pessimism, but a mastery of observation. In the quiet of their contemplation, they learned to watch the storm of the mind without being swept up in it. They saw that the suffering was not in the world, but in their attachment to the relentless wanting, the endless needing, the compulsive striving. When you observe your thoughts without judgment, without attachment, you begin to see them for what they are. Fleeting, temporary phenomena like clouds passing in the sky. And in that simple act of observation, the chains begin to fall away. This is the ultimate freedom. When you are no longer defined by the crowd, you are no longer a slave to its whims. When you are no longer a slave to your own thoughts, you find a profound, unshakable peace. You can still be in society. In fact, your presence becomes more powerful, more authentic. You are no longer living from a place of need, constantly seeking to fill an internal void with external validation. You are living from a place of wholeness. The world, with all its chaotic striving and empty pursuits, becomes a beautiful and tragic spectacle that you can observe with clarity, compassion, and detachment. You can love others without needing them to complete you. You can create without needing a crowd to validate your work. You can speak your truth without needing anyone to agree with you. This is the end of the script, but it is the beginning of your journey. You have now unmasked the great lie, and you have been shown the door. But the final act of rebellion is yours alone. It requires you to step away from the crowd, to turn off the noise, and to face the silence within. It is not an act you can perform for an audience. It is a private, courageous act of self-love. Do you have the courage to choose it? Do you have the courage to be alone, not just in body, but in mind, and to finally discover the ultimate truth that has been waiting for you all along? The wisest minds chose this path. Now, what will you choose?